Hello and welcome to the Product Marketing Festival. We have some fantastic sessions on the agenda for you today, but before we jump in, I have a very exciting announcement to make. The Product Marketing Awards are back for 2022 and I'm delighted to announce that nominations are now open. We received a whopping 181 new unique nominations last year, and this year we want even more PMM pioneers to be recognised. We have 7 top-notch categories for you to get involved in, and we can't wait to shout about the incredible product marketing talent within our community. The categories are Product Marketing Leader of the Year, Product Marketing Team of the Year, Product Marketing MVP of the Year, Product Marketing Newcomer of the Year, Positioning and Messaging Maestro of the Year, Product Launch of the Year, and Top Companies to Work in Product Marketing. Nominations are now open but must close on August 19th. So what are you waiting for? Spread the word, get your nominations in and celebrate those product marketing superstars that continue to go the extra mile. We'll be sharing a link to the nomination page in the chat throughout the day, so keep a lookout for that. We're also here if you have any questions, so please feel free to reach out via Slack or email. Now, after all the excitement, I just want to say a huge thank you to our sponsors, speakers, and you, our lovely audience, for joining us today at the festival. Please make the most of these sessions by asking your questions and sharing your feedback in the comment section of the video. So with that, let's get back to the sessions.
All right. Hi, everybody. Why don't we get started? I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you for joining in. This is Acing Your Marketing Job Interview. I think we all agree this is always an important topic. I think it's particularly important now, especially considering how many layoffs there have been lately, and perhaps some companies who've been withdrawing some of their job offers. I think the competitive space for job interviews has just gotten much more difficult than it already was. So I'm really glad that I'm able to be here today and kind of talk about some of the research and work I've done over the last couple of years on this very specific topic, very narrowly focused on marketers and their job interviews. So this session it's a little bit different than some of the other sessions that you might think of, right, that you've taken perhaps, where we're always focused on what do we take of some of these learnings and how do we apply them to our products, how do we apply them to our employers or our companies or whatever. Right, we're going to take those learnings and we're going to see how we can apply them to ourselves, to our own careers now. So in that sense, it's going to be slightly different. So for the next 15, maybe 20 minutes or so, I'm going to ask you to, or encourage you not to multitask. I'm going to encourage you to turn off Slack, email, whatever, your phone, silence your phone, and just focus. And I want you to do that because this session is really, it's about you, it's for you, it's probably very, very important. Even if you're not in an active job search now, there will be a day, I'm sure, where everybody on this call here will be in a job search of some sort. So with that, why don't we get started? What I want to do is ask you by writing down, I'm going to ask you actually a couple of questions. Write down for me what your ideal job is. So open up a document or a piece of paper, whatever you want, just grab a piece of paper and write down what is the ideal next job that you'd like to have. Maybe you're currently interviewing for it or applying for it. Maybe you already have it, but think about what's your next step, right? And even if that next step comes up 3 years from now, all right? Give you a bit to think about that. And then once you've written down what is that ideal job, give me the reasons that you think you are the right candidate for that job. So just pretend you're in that interview for that job today or tomorrow. Why would you be the right candidate as opposed to other candidates who are applying? So it takes a little bit of time on this one. Think through it. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds or so to just kind of think through this one, okay? All right. Again, just think about why are you the right person for this ideal job? Why should you be hired? What are kind of the value propositions that you bring to that specific role? Okay, so that's not a lot of time, I realize that, but we do have constraints for today. So this is an exercise you can certainly do afterwards on your own, again, on your own time. The next question I have for you is, if you consider yourself think of yourself as an interviewer, how do you consider, how strong of an interview do you consider yourself to be? Do you consider yourself to be a superior interviewer, above average, or are you perhaps below average, or are you just a bad interviewer? And you can be honest with yourself. You just, this is for you. No one else knows that, what you write down. So think about how would you rate yourself along that kind of spectrum that I just kind of gave: superior interviewers, above average, below average, and then just poor or bad interviewer. All right, so before I go on, I want to actually take a couple minutes to tell you about a little personal experience I had. It was what I call the dead horse interview. This is something where I was an interview candidate many years ago. I applied for a job that I really wanted, and frankly, I wasn't ready for at the time. And that came through in the interview process. And the hiring manager asked me a number of questions. I couldn't really answer them properly. I hadn't really thought about it. I was in a situation where I was doing a career transition from one industry in one space as a scientist to a marketing role. It was my first real interview, and I bombed it. I flat out failed it. And so much so that the interviewer, about 20 minutes into the interview, or maybe even 15 minutes into the interview, just said, you know what, why don't we just stop right here? I can see we're beating a dead horse. And we kind of ended the interview on that note. It was, you can imagine, it was embarrassing for me. It was also very frustrating for me. I thought about that a lot in the immediate aftermath. I still think about that interview now, even though it's been roughly 15 or so years since that happened. And it occurred to me at the time that I was doing something wrong. Before that, when I was a research scientist, I had really honed the ability to do interviews for scientific jobs. I was a chemist. And when I went in for an interview, I would more or less get the offer in most cases, in almost every case. And I had taken that kind of mindset and approach and taken it to a different situation with a different industry and a different job role. And clearly it wasn't going to work. So I'm glad that dead horse interview actually happened to me, because it really made me think, all right, things are different here. I need to really think about, how do I up my own game? How do I do things differently? Because what I've taken in the past doesn't one-on-one translate to what I'm doing today. So now fast forward a number of years to the pandemic. When this was first happening, I was thinking to myself, watching all these layoffs happen everywhere, and thinking to myself, my God, what can I do? I had one job opening at the time. I can only hire one person, but what can I do to help others? And I thought to myself, well, you know what? I know a number of senior executives, marketing executives. Maybe we can do like 4 or 5 interviews. I'll put them up on, or just interviews where we teach people how to do interviews. And we'll do these recordings. We'll put them up on LinkedIn, just short videos, and there you go. People can get some ideas on what to do. And so I recorded these. I called my contacts, recorded them over a weekend, and I posted them over the course of the next week or two, and that took off. So much so that I just started going on an ongoing basis with these. I continued to do this, and this turned into a podcast called Up Your Game, and that podcast ended up being 114 episodes in which I spoke with different marketing leaders, executives, marketing hiring managers, and marketing executive recruiters on what makes the right candidates, how do they perform, how are they different than your average candidate or perhaps below average candidate. And based on those conversations, as well as kind of my own knowledge as a hiring manager and some of my own thinking as a product marketer for benefits, positioning, and value proposition, and so forth, I came up with this book called Up Your Game. I don't know if anybody's ever seen either the podcast, perhaps you've seen it if you're connected to me on LinkedIn, or perhaps you maybe have heard of the book. But that came like a summary of all of the work that I had done, all of the research I had done. And we're going to talk about that today. So in that summary that I'm going to present to you in a moment here, I tried to boil down all of that information from 114 executives. You can imagine that's a lot of work that I'm only going to highlight some certain aspects of it in the slides here for you. But I do believe this will be very worthwhile. So let me share my slides here. Okay. All right. So the podcast, as I mentioned, was called Up Your Game. And in that, I spoke with a number of executives, tended to be in the technology industry, but not necessarily just in technology. They were in all kinds of various industries. They were all companies from startups all the way to giant corporations, Fortune 100 companies. So a nice little mix there. And the people I spoke with, you'll see in a moment, they were fairly senior. So they were really experienced hiring managers. So the first question that I already asked you guys, I also did an informal poll on LinkedIn. And I found that most candidates, they rate themselves as above average or superior in their own interview skills. Okay. And then now what's interesting about this is that this showed to me that people consistently overestimate their own performance. Because myself as a hiring manager and having actually conducted quite a large number of interviews, I found that most people would be in the below average or just plain bad categories. In fact, I would have flipped, if I had to guess it, I had to flip in my own experience, how people fall into these categories. Now, as I speak with these marketing executives, the 114 of them, I found for the most part, they all agreed with me that most of their candidates did not do a very good job at interviewing. Now, they may have been good marketers, they may have known what they're doing, but they were just not very good at interviewing. They never really thought about that, about how to apply those principles. So think about where you fit, where you claim to be or thought yourself to be, and then where you might actually fit in as we go through this session. As we go through the rest of the slides, you might want to adjust yourself up or down. And again, this is for you. You're the only one that knows this. So be honest with yourself, right? Because it'll help you become a stronger candidate. So the prevailing sentiment among those hiring managers, like I said, candidates generally don't meet their expectations, and not by a little bit, but by a mile. And there was a lot of frustration I found from these marketing executives that they expect and demand more from the candidates they have. So somebody might come in with a strong resume, but they really don't perform very well. They haven't done much research on the company. They really don't know what their own skill sets and strengths are, and they're not able to articulate much of that. So, which is, you would think that's surprising. You would think that would be something that everybody has spent a lot of time thinking about, but it's clearly not the case. In fact, one gentleman, I love this quote because I felt it summarized really like the kind of consensus agreement from all of the marketing executives I spoke with is that, this is San Francisco, the technology hub of the world. And you're telling me I can't find one good marketer, right? This is a guy at a Fortune 100 company. He gets hundreds of resumes for any position he has open. So for him to be really that frustrated, and that was very surprising to me. So who did I speak with? What's the kind of the breakdown here? You'll see fairly senior level people, for the most part, VPs or CMOs, head of marketing, et cetera, SVPs. A handful of other C-suite executives who also have a lot of kind of involvement hiring marketers at the very senior levels. And then of course, some marketing executive recruiters as well. So people who are very kind of experienced in this. I'm not sure if you're guys seeing this on yours as well, but I see on my slides, I'm seeing some sort of artifacts here. I'm not sure where that's coming from, so I apologize for that if that's coming across on your screen also. But as I spoke with these individuals, these leaders, I asked them a number of questions, right, as we had our conversations. How can marketers stand out in their own marketing job interview? That was one of the key questions I asked. There's certain questions I would ask over and over again. And from there, I saw these patterns, right? So this was the first one. And the consensus was, several reasons, several things that marketers do, the best marketing candidates do, that makes them stand out. They have data, and they show how it drives business results. So they come in with not just empty claims, but they actually have specific data and information to back that up. But it's not just any data. It's data that's directed to business results. So somebody said here, be creative and analytical, show me how you generated revenue. Marketing is all about driving revenue. Sometimes we lose sight of that, right? So what did you do in your job that is actionable, that's data driven, and that data really ties back to revenue? It's not always easy to be able to do that. And as a product marketer, I'll be the first one to tell you, in product marketing, it's extremely difficult to show how you drive directly to revenue. But it's something that's an imperative if you really want to stand out as a top-notch marketing candidate. I really like this quote: "Modern marketers bring data," very, very concise and very straight to the point, right? Um, the other thing they do, the best marketing candidates, right? They do several things. This is number two. They tell a narrative. They have a compelling and insightful story. So they're not going in there. Actually, in fact, most candidates will come in there during the interview and they'll recite their entire career history point by point from what's written on their resume. And there will be no kind of coherent narrative about why they are where they are today, where they want to go, how did they get here. It's just, I worked here, I did this, and then I did this, and then I worked there, and I did this, and I did that. And you'll be surprised at what percentage of candidates do that. In my experience, probably as a hiring manager, in my experience, probably 2/3 or more. And again, this is something that a lot of the people I spoke with validated, that they'll get candidates over and over again who just recite their resumes bullet point by bullet point without telling any sort of stories. So how do you make it a compelling and insightful story? You do a couple of things. You know your KPIs, which also means you understand your goals of what you're trying to achieve and what are those KPIs. Then you show how those KPIs and how that work helped drive the business forward. So that's one way. The other thing, another quote here is, "Tell me the evolution of your career path," which is exactly what we're saying here about telling an insightful and compelling narrative to where you are today and where you're trying to go tomorrow. And another thing the best marketing candidates do, they're strategic. For them, those interviews are two-way conversations. So they're not just sitting there waiting to be asked a question and then recite the answer to whatever they've memorized to that question. They actually go in there and they bring insights, novel insights to that hiring manager, which means you've done a lot of research beforehand so that you can bring in some information that the hiring manager hadn't thought about beforehand or wasn't aware of, or to show the hiring manager, hey, you've done your research, you really know what you're talking about, you understand their pain points and what their goals are, and you can have a conversation with them, right? The other thing about being strategic is you want to make sure the company is a fit for you. That's another really important piece. So you're not just the kind of spray and pray candidate who applies to any open job. That's not really being strategic. It's like, hey, look, this is my industry, this is my core interest, that's where I'm focused in on. So that's how you can show that you're much more strategic of a candidate. So when you put those three things together, you have you're data driven, that shows how you drive revenue and business results. You are able to tell a compelling career narrative, and finally you have a strategic way of approaching the interview. It's a two-way conversation. That's what makes the best marketing candidates in the minds of all of these executives. And what percentage actually met that goal? It's 10%. 10% of candidates, think about that, actually met those criteria, which is very much in line with what I've personally experienced as well. Now, if you think back to that one slide I showed right at the beginning about what percentage of candidates rate themselves as, superior, above average, below average, and whatever, bad, this doesn't align with that graph, right? People's expectations of how they perform is much, much higher than what marketing hiring managers actually rate them as. So we're going to try and figure out how to get into that 10% of what we call the unicorns, the best candidates. All right. Another question I asked of all the executives is there anything that commonly bothers you during an interview, and specifically bothers you of the candidate or of the interviewee during that interview? And you'd be surprised at how many people told me that, hey, our candidates are not familiar with my company. They come in unprepared. That's actually the most common problem. And that's shocking to me. It is and it isn't. It's shocking in the sense that it should never happen. If you're interviewing for a job, you should know everything about the company. All this information is available, much more so today than it was 3 decades ago, right? We have the internet, we have contacts on LinkedIn, we have all this information that we can now gather, which we just simply didn't have in the past. But you look at some of these comments here, again, these are CMOs and SVPs who make these types of comments. Somebody says, it's clear they've not even looked at our website. And this is somebody who's interviewing with the CMO. And the CMO says this about them, right? The amount of people who have not done their homework amazes me. This was yet another CMO, that very well-known CMO who actually made this comment. And another person and yet again, another CMO who said, hey, these types of candidates don't respect my time, right? And I would actually agree with that. If you're going to take the time of a senior marketing executives to speak with them and learn and offer yourself up as a company, you should have taken some time to understand at the very least what the company does. Okay, so what about your resume? What can you do to make your resume stand out, right? Because you won't even, in many cases, you won't even get to the interview until you have the proper resume. So the best resumes, there's 4 things that jump out. They match the job description very closely, right? There's overlap in what the candidate has experience in versus what the job is, what they're looking for. The resume shows business results and outcomes. And I'm surprised at how many times you don't see that in a resume. I've seen that a lot, actually. The resume shows how their work ties back to revenue, right? Again, it's being data-driven and showing that data, that how it correlates to revenue specifically. And you're able to highlight key achievements. So the resume shouldn't say everything that you've ever done, right? It highlights the most important things and the most important things that apply to that specific role that you're applying to. So that's what the best resumes look like. And what percentage of resumes actually hit that mark? Again, 10 to 15% is what I was told by multiple people, including some of these executive recruiters, that most resumes they see are very forgettable. They actually kind of get lost in the sea of identical looking documents. They don't stand out for them. Very few actually stand out. So if you think about those 4 points that you need to have in your resume, and the fact that only 10 to 15% of them have, that's actually an opportunity for you to be able to stand out, because if it was 50% of resumes hit those points, now that'll be much more difficult for you to be seen as a viable candidate. One executive recruiter, I love this comment, because he said, when I see these types of resumes, the one with the 4 points that hits the 4 points, I know it's going to be a home run. And he actually talked about, hey, I'm going to be rushing to get to that candidate because there's a very high likelihood another recruiter is going to be trying to hire that person. So I want to get there first. So it creates a sense of urgency among recruiters when you have the right resume for them to speak with you. So in summary, how do the best marketing candidates stand out? One, they come prepared. They know everything about the interviewer. They know everything about the company, the problems, and so forth. They bring data, and not just any data, but data that shows how they drive business results. They weave a narrative, a compelling narrative about their career path, about where they've been, where they're going, where they will be in a few years' time. They're much more strategic, right? They're able to have a conversation and bring novel insights and have a very high level conversation with people about where the company should be going, where the product might want to go, how to perhaps up level the marketing department. And it's okay to have some ideas, right? It's okay to be confident and have some ideas about those types of things. And the last one we didn't discuss earlier, I just kind of added this in. This is certainly my take on it. The best marketing candidates, they remain authentic. They're not just applying to every single job and hoping to get the one particular job. They're focused on what they want to be. They try not to be everything. They're here are my strengths, here are my weaknesses, and this is what I can do for you. And this is how I'm going to do it in terms of here's my work personality. I'm not going to change and pretend to be somebody that I'm not, right? So that's how your best marketing candidates stand out. So what can you do actually? What can you do to get into that kind of top 10 category? There's a lot. I think for everybody that can be done. First and foremost, start thinking about your own kind of narrative that you have when you go to an interview, and go back to that document or sheet that you wrote at the beginning and think about that for a second. Now I'm going to give you actually 10, 20 seconds to think about, hey, those points that I said about why I'm the best candidate for that particular role that I want, does that really apply? Does it align with what we're seeing here, right? Would you have been prepared for that interview? Would you have known everything about that company or perhaps that role? Would you have come in? Would you have had compelling data and data that drives business results, right? So you gave yourself some reasons about why you're the right candidate. Would those reasons include outcomes examples of how you had great outcomes in the past for work that you specifically did? Were you able to weave a narrative about how your career path, right? Would you have approached it strategically? So really think about that. And maybe now is not, you're certainly not going to have enough time to do that, but over the next few days and weeks, spend some time, significant time, focused time, deep concentration time on answering these questions and write them down for yourself, right? Because that's what you're going to take with you to your next job interview. And that's how you're going to really impress and wow that hiring manager. So I want to end up with a couple of actionable ideas here for what you can do to get better today, to start kind of really working on this. First and foremost, read the book here. And I'm not just saying that to pawn off my own book. It goes, anybody who's ever written, authored a book knows that you get very, very pittance basically for what you sell. But what I really believe in this book, because it goes into a lot of detail and a lot of depth of the research that I did and a lot of the conversations I've had with those marketing executives. I really feel there's a solid outcome for you to be able to take away from this book. So that's probably the single most important thing I could tell you to do right now. The second thing is practice with other people. Because you can write your own strengths, you can write your own kind of capabilities down on a piece of paper and then go stand in front of a mirror and practice. But it's never the same as talking to another person, because that person will ask you unexpected questions. That person will throw you for a loop. That person may disagree with you, right? And they can actually give you honest feedback. Those are things that you simply can't do in front of a mirror. So definitely practice with another person, and practice extensively. Practice with multiple people, right? That's how it should be done before your interviews. And finally, networking. You may not be looking for a job today, which is the exact reason you should be networking, right? When you start to network after you've lost a job or in a job search process, it's a bit too late for that. You should be building your network today, because it'll pay dividends down the line. Especially as you go up in your career, you'll see that more and more your ability to find a new job depends on the network you have, not so much on your ability to apply online, right? So I'm going to challenge everybody here after this session to connect with five other people, at least 5 other people in this conference. Send them a note. If you're not connected to me, start with me. That's your first connection. There you go. But certainly a minimum of 5 people that you should be connecting with, and then chat with them sometime. Find out what makes them tick, what they're doing, and perhaps who knows, maybe 2-3 years down the line, you'll come back together again. So with that, I hope you learned something new out of this. I hope you found some value from this session. Please drop any questions you have. And thank you very much. Wish you the best of luck in your job search.